solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Do you want the whole truth?
I don't think you're ready.
Governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people.
It's Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth.
Happy Friday, everybody. Hope you're doing well. And I hope you're staying warm. I got to tell you, this is crazy weather. It's December, it's cold, and it's snowing. I don't know what's happening anymore, man. What you doing to me? We have a great show for you today. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, proudly on. Say it with me now. 8FR Talk. Okay, are you doing like a Village People thing? People watching are like, are you going to start doing YMCA with your hands now? Okay, stop it. That was a real treat for you all watching. Didn't even realize I'm doing it. That's how enthused I am. All right, Friday, right? You know what this means. We've got to get right to it. Seton Motley? No, he's a little later on in the hour. Bottom of the hour, your calls responding to the Matthews interview. Matthews interview? Hardball! And he had that interview with who? Whom? The President of the United States. Someone who is all too familiar with the power of the presidency. Woodward is in the house. Chris Woodward, it's time for you to beat the press, considering the fact you're the business and environmental reporter for American Family News and doing a great job anchoring. You and Chad Groening, it's like a tag team. Just bam, right there.
That's how we trade off. We slap hands and tell each other brother and things like that.
All right, let's get right to the clip.
Okay.
Then. Yeah, that was an image. I'm sorry. All right, we go right to it, and this is actually something very offensive, quite offensive. Chris Matthews complimenting Al Sharpton. Well, that in itself is not offensive. Al Sharpton's record is offensive. Chris Matthews pointing out something in relation to apartheid, the passing of Nelson Mandela, and the Republican Party. Here is Chris Matthews still just beaming after the interview he had with the president. Roll it.
Just for a second, I want to point out something. I haven't heard anything as smart as what I heard Reverend Sharpton say a couple of minutes ago in 5 years. That is the most perceptive thing I've seen. It just rocks me. The difference between the way F.W. Clark handled the need for change and the inevitable election, democratic election of Nelson Mandela, a legitimate election, truly legitimate for the first time. He was never legitimately elected. For him to recognize his role in history, which was to be a patriot, at that point, is so different than the way Mitch McConnell handled the election of Obama. So different. And to set it up that way, the juxtaposition, they were willing, the McConnell people on to the far right, were willing to destroy the country in order to destroy Obama. Whereas to succeed in a country he loved, F.W. Clark was willing to see it form to black rule so that it could be done successfully, so that he would have his country have a better future.
Well, F.W. de Klerk, we're going to talk a little more about the history overall there with Bruce Thornton at the top of next hour and the legacy of Nelson Mandela. My question to you is, here's a man who's interviewed the President of the United States, and he has referred to Mitch McConnell as basically attempting to be someone who would be an advocate for apartheid, of racism, willing to sacrifice his country for on the altar of politics. Tell me, why would anybody want to watch an interview with someone who has that point of view interviewing a president that obviously he shares the ideology of?
That's a good question. I'm not surprised to hear someone, certainly on the network in which Matthews works for, say something that of that magnitude. In this case, he's talking about apartheid and one of the senators who happens to be a Republican. What stood out to me in that particular comment there was, if I'm not mistaken, he said that what Al Sharpton said was smarter than anything he had heard in the last 5 years, which includes all of the interviews that Matthews has done with President Obama.
Well, that's true too.
He said
So,
Al Sharpton is smarter than President Obama.
I got to tell you, Tingles worries me sometimes, to say the least. Now, is this going to be a Tingle fest? Not so fast, mister, because we've got some other things coming out of, I believe this is MSNBC, and I want to check it.
Okay.
But this is Richard Stengel of Time Magazine, and he is talking about Mandela's legacy and recognizing that he was a political pragmatist and he had some pretty big blind spots and a bit of a checkered past, and we must apply context to the greater good that he served. It's interesting because we're going to, again, be talking about this next hour in depth. But here is Mr. Stengel. Roll it.
Dad, how come we never see you? And he said, because I have to be a father to millions of children in South Africa. So even at that early time, this is before he went to jail, he had a sense that he was carrying on something bigger than himself.
Absolutely. He had a great mission. And one of the lessons, too, is that he had one gigantic principle, which was to bring freedom and democracy to his people. Everything was a tactic. He was a pragmatic politician. He wasn't a visionary necessarily. He wasn't a philosopher. He wasn't a saint. But he never deviated from that. But anything that would get him there, he embraced, including violence, which he took the ANC, he created Umkhonto we Sizwe, the spear of the nation. He created the violent wing of the ANC. So, and people don't realize that and don't remember that. We've kind of made him into a Santa Claus. He wasn't. He was a revolutionary.
He was a revolutionary. Chris, this is also on MSNBC, as you well know. Mm-hmm. But this is a part of the story that certainly is not getting the coverage, arguably, because we've deified this man.
Right.
And to me, I'm uncomfortable with that, but I also recognize the extraordinary good that he did do. But in light of the incredible blind spots that he had and the good that he could have done. But that aside, your thoughts on the coverage overall of the passing of Nelson Mandela?
It is pro good Mandela. A lot of the coverage does not mention some of it. A lot of the coverage at this point has not mentioned the bad, and I would probably guess that it's not going to start working its way into the coverage over the weekend either, even when they start looking for new angles, which they will do. We did have a story today at 5 Eastern, 4 Central, in which AFN's Russ Jones did mention some of the things that were in Mandela's past, not the positives. Certainly it could be said that, none of us are perfect. Our righteousness is as filthy rags, as the Bible says. Yeah. But to answer your question, a lot of the coverage has been Mandela was a saint, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And again, we can look at the good, and certainly there was extraordinary good, the forgiveness, the leaving of power.
Sure.
But nonetheless, we have a duty to report people in context to recognize. Mm-hmm. And I love your point about works. Bravo, my friend.
And I will say this, too. I mean, a number of our nation's forefathers had military backgrounds, and certainly there are things in war that are horrible and terrible, and people die.
Yes.
Can someone make, well, there's a difference between war and maybe what is kind of an infighting between two groups? Someone might make that argument going forward.
They might. Ed Henry making the argument that, well, things are a little confusing. Earlier this week, I actually saved this one for you because he goes at Jay Carney, the White House press secretary, on Obamacare's website, and how things are being calculated with error messages and people being queued into the system. And here is Ed Henry asking that question, a little part of that, and Jay Carney answering the follow-up. Roll it.
Error messages they got 3 days ago. Confusing error messages with the queuing message, which is quite a different thing entirely. That is, that the queue message is a specific tool that was upgraded and improved and made to be more sophisticated, so that when there were surges in traffic on the website, and when the number of users reached a certain level, that people would get those messages that they were placed in a queue, that if they wanted to enroll, there was a better time for them to come back.
I understand
so
that. They're still not enrolling. They're in a different line now, but
well,
they're not.
Actually, Ed, I contest that, and I would ask you to find anywhere where I said that everybody would be able to enroll instantly on this day.
What's the goal then? Just
Well, I think
keep
you know
moving them
what
into other lines? I mean, the goal is obviously to enroll more people, right?
Absolutely. And
so if they're still
those people
waiting,
who want to enroll, Ed, I would point you to the fact that more people are visiting the site and are able to effectively go from beginning to end when it comes to enrolling than was the case in October and in November. Significant improvements have been made.
The last part reminds me of like the former Soviet Union, the talking points, or even the George Bush skit where in '92 SNL, he kept on repeating 1,000 points of light. Yes, Iraq War. Yes, we did it. Chris Woodward, your thoughts on not only the questions, were they fair, the follow-ups, but I'd also like to know your thoughts on the entire spin or communication. Let's just put it as communication coming from advocates of Obamacare and, quote, fixing the website.
I think the questions are okay, but again, as something I've pointed out in the past, there's a difference between what questions are thrown out there and then how the stories turn out. And we don't necessarily always see stories that really drive home those points come out of those briefings. So the questions I think are fine. Certainly this little heated exchange between these two is just something you and I are probably going to keep talking about in these Beat the Press segments, Lord willing. By that I mean that our segments continue. A case in point with the press coverage of all this, if USA Today right now, I've got it pulled up on the computer in here, the headline is 3.7 million visited healthcare.gov this week, and it has a picture of a grinning President Obama. Now, there is a difference between visiting and enrolling for health care. Mr. Carney might take a different approach there and try to argue semantics, but there is a difference, and certainly in this case, there is a difference between being in the queue and enrolling, but if you're in the queue, you're not enrolling. And you had the clip from, I believe it was Megyn Kelly's show earlier this week.
Yes.
In which
the doctor?
When she
Or
mentioned
the
that insurance companies
Yes.
still weren't getting the subsidy. So even if these people are enrolling, the insurance companies aren't getting paid, and that is just continuing headaches for the already technologically challenged website.
Again, appreciate the analysis not only of the question, but how the story is covered later and referencing the picture and the headline, which many people just read because of lack of time and doing other things and lack of interest, thinking that they're getting lied to all the time. Certainly not the case at American Family News with Chris Woodward, and being the business and environmental reporter that you are, anchoring on occasion or in the cycle of anchors with you and tag team partner.
Right.
But want to give Brent just a heads up, give me a little time on the break here. I want to get to a CNN reporter asking Jay Carney about inequality. All of a sudden, we've returned to the idea of inequality, or at least the messaging on inequality, with President Obama giving a major speech this week on equality and government's role to bring it down. And here is the CNN reporter reminding Jay Carney inequality has increased under President Obama. Roll it.
A big part of his speech yesterday was about income inequality. I mean, he said this is one of the driving motivations for the remainder of his presidency. But that disparity has been exacerbated.
No, to the contrary. I'm sure you were here. You saw that for the first time in decades, because of the president, we reduced unfairness in the tax code and addressed the imbalance through the deal at the end of last year, or January 1st of this year.
I was saying Wall Street is feeling the benefits of this recovery as it stands right now. The people on the streets right now are protesting because they want a higher minimum wage. They're saying they're not feeling it.
Jim, I really urge you to look at the president's speech, look at the data. The fact is the president has long supported policies and continues to support policies and has taken action on policies that go right at this issue. That work is not done. And there's no question that when he took office, that job for all of us in Washington and for everyone who's concerned about this issue was made enormously more difficult by the worst economy that we've seen in our lifetimes.
So, what do you think about not only the question, but the response?
I'm pretty pleased to see CNN bring that up. Certainly, what he said there is verifiable, not just with income inequality, but certainly we've seen a huge number of people on food stamps, and there's been other people asking for government assistance. And even if it's true that this president has done things for tax reform, that's with help from Republicans. I mean, it takes two to tango, so to speak, and it takes both parties to come together and improve something in the way of tax reform. Certainly, Republicans are saying we're not going to raise taxes anymore. We gave you that with the fiscal cliff deal and some other things. So I think it's pretty surprising, and just from a journalistic perspective, I don't have any problem with the questions that he was asking.
I thought, again, it was a pretty good question.
Mm-hmm.
Now we shift to, we're going to go to Chris Matthews. And
back to Matthews.
Back
and
to
it's
Matthews.
Not even Christmas.
I know. That's it. Yes. But Chris Matthews, and a comment setting up a question to President Obama about the Republicans. Roll it.
He said, what can we do to stop the GOP, the Republicans, from rigging the states, or rigging the votes, state by state, to disenfranchise voters and destroy our democracy? 36 states right now, led by Republican legislatures, have been trying to make it difficult for minority people to vote, especially in big cities and older people. Yeah. Everybody knows the game. Republicans often admit the game to deny people the vote. What's your reaction? Oh, we're almost done. I have to ask you a little question you may not like to answer.
Oh.
This could be tough.
All right.
It's an essay question.
Okay.
The qualities required of a president.
Yeah.
Vice President Joe Biden, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Compare and contrast.
Not a chance am I going there.
Okay, we get the tenor of the interview. Your thoughts on, I asked the original question, which was, why would anybody watch? But I think Chris Matthews is a very bright guy, and he does have an incredible history, as well as a knowledge base when it comes to politics
he does.
And history. So your thoughts on the types of questions that were asked?
It was a complete softball of an interview. And certainly anybody out there who might be left-leaning listening to these segments, and there are people, and we welcome them, and
absolutely,
certainly they're free to comment on my Twitter account or whatever.
As we go to break,
right?
Yes,
you and I have a rapport, I guess, and we're friends. We've eaten lunch when you've come to Tupelo and all that stuff.
I miss you.
Yeah, and
and I'm no longer your tag team partner. I'm sorry.
But you know what? I'm not your president.
Yeah,
I'm not your president, and you don't represent millions of people and speak for millions of people who might have not elected you. So there is a difference. It's a complete softball interview. When you're laughing in the questions and whatever, that's not an interview. That's just
it's like
guys getting together to talk.
It's oftentimes like when Senator Inhofe came on my show. Yeah, called myself out on that one. Crane Durham said, I love the senator. Great guy. And enjoyable interviews. Nonetheless, the big show, Daniel Bryan, I got to tell you, Chris, you all do a great job. Give me your Twitter feed one more time.
Yeah, Twitter feed is at AFN, the letter C, Woodward. At AFN C Woodward.
Hi, this is Dan Celia from Financial Issues. So many people